This is an opportunity to put you on the hot seat. Are you ready, baby? I would never throw you a curveball. I didn't think you could handle. Straight change, baby.
There you go. I'm just in the days. I got like. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I might try it.
I'm putting a reminder in my calendar.
All right.
So that we don't forget.
Fireman Jim left the building and everyone looks so surprised. Well, you know. Was it?
Okay. Glad that you were.
Already opening the Bill Drawings, I think you're looking for a job really soon. A lot of mileage. Dude is right. Dude is right. Just say it.
Everyone ready?
We're gonna use a new case thing for it.
Good morning, everybody. We're gonna go ahead and call this special meeting to order. I apologize for having my back to you. Had to arrange seating some way. So, Linda, okay? If I had it my way, I'd be patient. That's standard. Okay, Madam Clerk, roll call.
Commissioner Mixon? Here. Commissioner Nero?
Here.
Commissioner Mellon Rogoven? Here. Commissioner Vogt? Here. Mayor Hoskins?
Here. Okay, today's meeting is to discuss the future use of the Altenheim owned village property. This is gonna be a wide-ranging discussion. We're gonna suspend Robert's rules. We're gonna do this workshop style. I think every commissioner will have the opportunity to state their thoughts, to ask their questions from staff and from our consultant from Burke Engineering. And having said that, I will turn the floor over to Village Administrator Rachel Pentler.
Okay, before we get started here, I know Commissioner Vogt has requested to say a few things, so I'll hand it over to her.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to thank all of you for coming today to this special meeting, and I want to thank the mayor for calling the special meeting. And we're also thrilled that Commissioner Nero can make it today, so we're happy to see you here. I just wanted to share really quickly before we get started that, ideally this is the first of several meetings, and my hope and overall goal of this process is creating like a facilities master plan. This has been a long time coming, and we finally have our building assessments, which we're using to inform our discussion today. And I just hope we can use those documents and start that conversation today to create sort of that living document that us and future councils can use, incorporating those, our space needs, and ideally not just playing whack-a-mole with $500,000 projects that pop up, and we start to create a sensible plan for near and long-term projects. That said, today's main focus is the water reservoir and finding the best location for it. But ideally by the end of today, we can be wrapping our minds around how we want to proceed with the next few meetings and creating that master plan. I also wanted to say that the Altenheim will be a major focus of this, because we are talking about where this water reservoir is going to go. And some of that discussion is also going to include the CTA lot community center, because they are all intertwined. But I don't think we should get too bogged down into what decisions are being made on the future use of the Altenheim property. I think that is sort of a separate discussion. Today, we're focusing on the water reservoir. But this is a great opportunity for the council to start sharing their ideas for the space. We've had a lot of great input over the years from different committees and boards, and we can now start to really take that in and digest it and share that with each other. I also wanted to say that as we have these conversations, that we not get too bogged down in the restrictive covenants of the sales contract. I know over the years, the Altenheim has been open to ideas that didn't necessarily fall within those confines. And I think that they might be open to ideas that maybe don't exactly fall within that for potential future use. So while we're just sharing ideas and not making decisions, I think we can sort of aim big and then dial it in as we keep our community stakeholders, Altenheim and neighbors of the Altenheim together with us in that conversation. And I do want to say this is time sensitive because we need to start really formulating a master plan, but also because of the issues with the water reservoir. And so I appreciate everybody really making this meeting happen and getting the conversation started. I also just want to say very quickly that a resident did reach out to me yesterday and asked why the meeting wasn't posted on social media. And so I went to the website and I posted on social media, but hopefully going forward, whenever we have any public meetings, if we could get those on the website and social media at the same time and just sort of knock it all.
That was simply a matter of, I just got back I was out last week and Meg was out the beginning of this week. And so the timing of it, once we got the agenda posted, I got it up there and, was also dealing with, upon return, the community center flooding and all the other issues. So
100%.
we will work on it. We will work on it for future.
I bring it up under time sensitive
yeah.
because we are trying to get a lot of things handled, and this is what I said to that resident. But just going forward, if we can focus on that, that would be amazing. And I told them that we were going to do that and that we have had a lot of challenges. So Thank you for sharing that. And again, I just want to thank you all for coming today, and I look forward to a really productive conversation. So thank you for giving me that.
Right, great, so just this is the map that we're gonna kind of talk about as far as the Altenheim is concerned. I'm just putting this up here so that you guys have a vision of kind of the separate areas that, you know, we will touch upon. But the first thing that I want to do is just kind of give a brief overview of all the village-owned properties that, you know, we are at some point in time going to be, you know, having to talk about. We've got a lot of building assessments that we did several years ago that we're going to want to have a future meeting in regards to. I sent you all the summaries. You should also have the detailed information in regards to that strategy that was put forth as far as repairs that were going to be needed over the last couple of years. So that's going to be a big project that I think will, you know, we'll definitely undertake as we move through the next several years and we look at the needs of each of the buildings that are village owned. We've also got we've got some separate issues related to this particular parcel of land that I just kind of want to go through really fast. I know we're going to focus more on the water reservoir, but just so that you have an understanding of where we're at on the different topics. I know in the past, one of the things that came up was this desire to talk about the Altenheim property as a whole, and as opposed to talking about it in different parcels. And so I think there's a need to do a little bit of both. So if we could start this discussion off with just a little summary. I've got Jim Emilio from Burke here, as well as Sal, Stella, and Steve Blinky here to, you know, answer any questions that you might have without going into real in-depth about some of these things. Knowing that at some point in the near future, we're going to have to get more in depth on some of these things. So a couple of things related to this. So one of the, I would say probably the longer projects that has been on the table has been this bike path. The village signed an IGA in 2021 that was set to expire in 2023 with the county. We got an extension in 2023 on this IGA. The IGA is set to expire this December 31st, 2025. Since the extension, what we were waiting for really was trying to, and Jim and Steve and Sal step in whenever, you know, you feel the need to. There were some utilities based on the initial design that needed to be taken into consideration. And so we were looking at the land that was needed. It was not owned by the village. And so we were trying to figure out how do we acquire the land that was needed in order to vary the utilities that were related to having this bike path essentially along Van Buren. And so, you know, some different ideas transpired along the way. The Altenheim proper, which I will refer to as the actual organization, the Altenheim, and not just the name that we call this land, approached us about wanting to buy back some land from us to give them a buffer around their property. And so then we got into talks about that. And that has not been resolved yet. Since then, also, we have, you know, seen an increase in costs that are, you know, that happen when you take a project over time. You know, and then there was also a request from one of our commissioners to see if we could move the bike path to a different location on the property to the west end of it. So, kind of talking a little bit about what that looks like. I mean, obviously we have 6-7 months left until our IGA expires. Jim, if you want to kind of add some details to fill in the blanks on where we're at with that.
Yeah, so I mean, we're kind of in a holding pattern until those utilities are relocated. So for everybody's benefit, the path is on the west side of Van Buren Street between the curb and the fence line generally. And the tight point or the pinch point is along the building itself. So we had looked at acquiring an easement or some land there to put the ComEd poles, so we had enough room for our path. It will take ComEd some time to relocate their poles once an easement is in place or if or when an easement is in place. So it's gonna be very hard to get that work done before December of this year. Just based on ComEd's timeline. We can do the balance of the path in the interim, but that's a pretty big gap.
Sure. Go ahead.
So, okay, a couple questions. I guess the first would be, so I had asked about relocating the path to the west side of the property. Not the west side of it here, but, and I have a drawing somewhere. But essentially it would kind of snake its way down the west side and follow our different colored sections of property and then exit.
Have it come this side. Yeah, on this left side. Currently, just for everybody in the audience, right now it's designed to just go on this side along the east side of the Altenheim proper, but the west side of Van Buren. Commissioner Bogus is looking to see if it would be possible to put it on the west side of the entire property. This is the cemetery over here. This is the village parcels.
And so basically, you know, that also has a few different questions packed into it. Considering the terms of the grant, would we even be able to amend the design? But given the fact that, you know, the holdup with ComEd and all of these additional costs and easements that are required to put it on the, let's just call it the east side, so we east and west.
Sure.
It kind of sounds like that project isn't necessarily even seeded itself to fruition at this point. So could we entertain the idea of adjusting the design and still keep the grants? And then also, I mean, do you see that as maybe an easier project now, considering these issues that have come up with the east side? You know, hiccups with the easements and the utilities. And then the final question is, it was, I think, a 50% grant. So I was wondering where we were coming up with the additional 50 at this point.
So I can't speak to what was originally necessarily agreed to, but the grant covers 250,000. The original project cost was around 512,000. Jim estimated that based on the time that has lapsed since then, that this project would be probably closer to 700,000. With the grant, is the grant a 50% or is it?
The
It was
grant
just for
is
200
just,
250,000.
It's
Okay.
250 plus or minus a couple $1,000. I think it was 248 and change, but yeah, so it's just a flat amount. They're not gonna increase it. We could request an increase. But yeah, unfortunately, several years have elapsed from that, and we've seen a lot of inflation both in things that we purchase and in the construction market as well. So that's why I'm estimating about 700 for that path along the roadway. Looking at this exhibit that you had passed over, it looks feasible to me to construct. I'd have to look a little bit at the property at, I guess it'd be the northwest corner of the building. You see how you have the different colored areas? It's the one that's not really colored there.
Well, and could I add something to that?
Mhm.
Because right now that is village owned property, but that's a proposal from the Altenheim and a portion of what they want to purchase back.
Okay.
So that's not,
Yeah, all of this portion here.
That's just their
is all
proposal.
current. That's just their proposal. So this is our current. We own all of.
So Jim, we've already spent $73,000 in design and engineering for the path on the east frontage. Can you give us an estimate of what a complete redesign and engineering would be?
I mean, it would be somewhere in that same ballpark. You know, there's a lot of cost in the topographic survey that we did on the original location. So we would need to do that as well for the, for if we decide to go to the west side and then develop plans. We could probably give you a little bit of economy of scale because we've already done some work over there. With pen to paper and let you know what it is. I can also give you an estimate on what this path would be versus what the current estimate is on the east path. There is some costs included in relocating several of the streetlights on Van Buren, right? So that would be a cost that would be lesser on the other one. However, the other version looks like a longer route, so.
And so you do think though that there would be, and I won't hold you to this or any figures, but like there could potentially be significant savings moving it to the left with that by not having to move the utility poles, the streetlights, et cetera.
Utility pole, streetlights, we also had some fence that was impacted, yes.
And
So
then
there
the-
could be a little bit of savings by
Okay.
going to the other side.
What is a little bit?
Well, you can't hold it to that yet.
Just, I mean, are we talking, 10, just.
It's not
Yeah.
more than 20,
So-
15-20%.
So I would suggest that we, recommend to Jim that he put together some cost estimates to be able to, so that we have those numbers. And that at a future date, we can decide, because we're gonna have to decide whether or not we want to continue this project. Because there are some major milestones we have to hit in the next 6 months in order for this grant to, be utilized. And so, I think it's a bigger conversation, that we should have, in the coming weeks, but, now that we kind of have, those questions in place, and feel free after this, if anything else comes up and related to the bike path that you want us to put together. This is something we're gonna have to put on the main council agenda, I would say in the next month, if not, in the next month, because we need to know how to move forward if we are going to move forward with it. And I also need to look at the budget, because I don't know that we've actually placed, where we've placed the village's portion of this in the budget.
Yeah, so what are we doing here? I mean, that's a $700,000 of creep, $225,000 of creep from the original estimate. $250 of the grant sounds great. But not when you have to come up with, I don't know, almost 500 and some odd $1,000, plus engineering costs, right? And plus whatever rework that has to happen. You guys all know, man, we all sat in the budget review meeting. I love the idea of a bike path. I do. I think it's great. The idea of a trailhead, bringing the parade path into Forest Park and kicking it over to River Forest and down to downtown businesses. I think it's great. I just don't think the timing is right for Forest Park. I think there's other priorities, quite frankly. And to waste any more of, again, wasted time is a bad word as far as I'm concerned. And I would hate to see Jim put any more work into anything because he's not free. And so I don't want to see us waste. I just don't see where we're going to get the money to do it. I don't think it needs to go to council. I think it just needs to stop right here. And I know that's probably disappointing, and it hurts me to say that, but I think that I just don't see a path forward with that particular project. When we're talking about trying to find the money to support a water reservoir, when we're trying to upgrade our buildings and our structures, when we're trying to separate the women of our fire department from the men and the way that they can bunk and sleep, and having the change houses in the fire and the police station that are separate and equal, and all these wonderful things, right? So this to me seems like you do when you have exorbitant funds and things are good and times are great, and you have some extra money to be able to do stuff like this, which the Village Forest Park absolutely does not. And I know that sounds like such a hard door slammed, but and so be it. I'll say it. I just think that this is something that we have to show up. And who's to say that somewhere down the road there might not be another grant opportunity for us to go after, and there very well may be, right? There's also this idea that whatever happens with this parcel of land, there's a bargaining chip with whomever, whatever we decide to do, whether there's a developer or it's part of the negotiation on what we want done with that property, to have some sort of path through there as part of the project. And it might not be as cost prohibitive as us just fronting it right now. It might be even a little bit more irresponsible to put a bike path through there in any configuration without even knowing what we're doing with that piece of land, right? So there's all of those things that are running through my head, but most importantly, It's just, it's a dollars and cents thing, for me, and I hate to see us, really waste any more time on it, I guess is the bottom line.
Jim, bearing the poles, we're doing it under the franchise agreement. that we
ComEd
have,
would be
so
paying for
we're not, that's not
Correct.
an expense that we're
Correct.
gonna incur.
Correct.
So maybe in light of what Brian just laid out here, maybe we should just proceed with bearing those 4 poles, setting the table. The one thing going back to moving it to the west is the one conversation that needs to be had hasn't been. And that's concurrence from the people of the Altenheim, because that is a use that is covered under the restrictive covenants. And will they want people coming directly onto their property? During the discussions, one of the concerns that they expressed is they want to be buffered from that. And in the package was going to be a 6-foot privacy fence along that existing frontage. And I think that needs to be honored. So if we're gonna have a conversation with the Altenheim, the topic is obviously gonna be, do you want recreational people introduced and transecting, not their lot, our lot, in the context of the restrictive covenants?
I want to just say one more thing, if I may. I agree with Commissioner Nero about, you brought up a lot of my points. One of those being, we don't know what is going into the Altenheim. We don't know what kind of development it's going to be. And to build something like this along the full stretch of the east side of that property, we are then potentially going to dig it up to put in curb cuts or new roads and so it does seem a little bit cart before the horse to have something especially along the east side. I will say that a walking path falls within the restricted covenant because it says it won't disturb the quiet enjoyment of the properties. And if it were to go along the west side of the property, it would all be on village-owned property. There would not be easements like there are on the east side. So, it's one thing to say, let's look into the west side and see if there's some savings and it's something we can still afford. But I also agree with Commissioner Nero, if we're on the hook for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 that isn't coming from somewhere, we don't have it earmarked somewhere, it might be time to pump the brakes. It's absolutely something that if we do an RFP at some point, the mayor has shared with us different things to think about when we're potentially creating one of those. It can be developer put in a bike path. So I don't think that this is totally off the table, but it sounds like, and you can correct me here, if ComEd doesn't move those poles in time, do we have to be done? Do we have to be working on this by December?
So the
Or-
agreement is complete December
So it
31st.
seems crazy to just keep going
So
if we're not even gonna be able to build it.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't think it's feasible to complete along Van Buren Street by that date.
Okay.
ComEd is just, even if you said right now, ComEd get out there, it's gonna take, it just takes time
Right.
for them to go through that process.
So if you could say there's gonna be considerable savings going on the west, I would say let's explore it, but if you think it's gonna save $10,000-$20,000, then maybe we need to put a pause.
So something that can be done is there are annual grants that are out there, not just the one that we currently have, but other ones, namely ITEP, that would fund bike paths like this, and those would be at like an 80-20 or 70-30 split. So the one that we got is Invest in Cook for Van Buren, and at the time it was 50-50, right, with those dollars. So there is an opportunity to, whether it's the same location or on the west side, to try to get additional funding through the ITEP.
I hate to give up money, but if it's
80-20, which
it's a
way?
different time.
The good way.
Okay.
And I want to add, I also hate to give up money, and grants are really great, but matching grants are not always great because that means that we have a portion that we have to pay, and sometimes, and right now, it's almost always going to be more than we have to pay. And just, I completely agree with what Commissioner Nero said, that this is not the time for us to be looking at sort of extras in the village when we simply can't afford it. Our projected year end in the general fund is a deficit of $1.9 million plus the 1.2 we owe ourselves because we borrowed from the TIF. So we have, not only do we not have extra money, we don't even have the money that we owe ourselves. And so I think to be talking about putting in a bike path, even if it's an 80-20, for me, is just a no-go right now at this point.
How long would the extension be for? If we got an extension on the grant?
They did 2 years last time. We could request 2 as well. We could also ask them if we could repurpose it for design for maybe on the west side and utilize it on that.
If we could conceivably get a 2-year extension, that wouldn't cost us. Anything, right? Correct. If we could conceivably get a 2-year extension, and if this council anticipates possibly issuing an RFP within the next year or so, I'm wondering if we could, put in the extension, put in the installation of the bike path as part of what's required under an RFP for potential developer.
We can certainly ask to see if they would entertain another extension, and then that from there would give you the information, because if they won't, then it's kind of a dead point. But if they are willing to entertain the idea of an extension, we could look into how we could play that out in the future.
And then in the meantime, maybe we can check with Altenheim on their thoughts for about.
Any other comments, questions in regards to the bike path? Okay, I want to touch real briefly on the north parcel, aka the Grove. This is the portion that the council recently approved a use of public way agreement with Opportunity Knox to put their OK Farm in that section up north. This is where we hold our 3 Groovin' in the Grove concerts, and we used to hold Ribfest there. So just wanted to give you all an update on Director Stella and I met with Phil Carmody, the president of Opportunity Knox. They are going to go ahead and get started with some of their stuff. We are in constant communication with them, and we are making them aware of when that this is a use of public way. It is temporary. It takes them through November. We're still working on the actual agreement, which will come to the council, when that is ready, and that any major changes that they are making to the area need to come in front of the council. So just wanted to give a quick update on that. We touched briefly on the Altenheim Proper's request to buy back land. As you know, that they are looking to create a buffer around their buildings and their property. So we do still have that will on the table that we'll have to take up for discussion, hopefully in the near future. And then just to touch on real quickly, this middle parcel, which is the purple parcel. One of the key things in the 2021 Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity IGA states that once demolition is completed, and this was from the demolition grant that the village got, the grantee will prepare the site for a mixed use that will consist of residential, commercial, and green space. So I just wanted to kind of remind everybody about that as we look to have future discussions on what the development ideas may be. I know we're not going to touch upon that, today, but just want to put that reminder out there. Okay, so any questions, comments on the things that I've mentioned so far?
Just to add to the triangle, the north lot. During the Altenheim discussions, and we had a very qualified, very smart, very engaged group of people, many of which had were credentialed land use people, planners, chairman of the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul participating. Topic of developing that vertically never came up. It's of a certain shape that makes it, sort of limited, its desirability limited, and subjectively, I think the view from Madison to the buildings is sweeping and something that should be preserved. So I was actually heartened by the fact that the committee in total basically said that should remain green,
The growth, correct.
the growth. And an intergenerational, programming there, I think is a feather in this council's cap.
Anything else? Okay, so I'm gonna turn our attention to the water reservoir. We've had 2 presentations now from Burke Engineering into, what our options are. I'm gonna ask Director Stella to give us a little update on, what happened at the community center last week, and the pump station, in regards to, the flooding that occurred, just so that you understand kind of the damage that took place after we had water flood our reservoir.
So on the evening of, say, Thursday the 15th to Friday the 16th, there's a device that goes into our water towers and our water reservoirs. It's called a pressure transducer. Pretty much what it does is it regulates how much level of water is in each one of these facilities. They go bad, and during that night, if the pressure transducer at the Jackson Station water reservoir, first it started to flake out around 2 o'clock in the morning. We got alarms through our system that said that the water reservoir was high. I alerted my water operator, who also was awoken by the alarms. We checked the levels. At the point of when the alarms started to go off, the pressure transducer regulated itself. The pumps turned on to kick water to the system and to the water towers, and it started to go down in the reservoir. I checked the cameras. The water was dissipating from the overflow on the side of the community center, so everything was good. We went back to sleep. About an hour and a half later, we got a call from police saying that there was water coming from everywhere in the buildings. At that point, again, I checked the cameras. There was water coming from the overflow, but there was also water coming from all of the doors. I dispatched our water operator to the scene. When he got to the scene, the community center was flooded, and so was the water pump station. After further investigation, it was determined that the pressure transducer at that point, second time in one night, it completely went dead. When it went dead, it told our SCADA system, which is our computer system, regulates our water system, that there was no water in the system, was just reading zeros. It told the system to kick on no valve that opens up the valve from Chicago to fill the reservoir. We do have a fail safe in the reservoir. It's a float, kind of like a sump pump float. That did not work. So everything started to fill up, and that's when the residents saw water coming out of the doors. Over the last couple of years, we had the reservoir cleaned. It was determined that there was issues in the reservoir. We had to have scaffolding put in. We had staff go up and down in the reservoir to check the meters every 6 months to determine if there was more damage to the ceiling. At some point, something got damaged with the float, and that's what caused that to go bad. It was a perfect storm because once the reservoir was over the level of alarm, it never alarmed. So there was a glitch in our system. The computer did not alarm us the second time to say that there was something going on. It was the police department that alarmed us, and at that point, it was too late. So now the village has claimed the incidents under insurance. We had a company come out and remediate the problem as far as getting all the flooding out, the carpeting, and the walls were cut out where there was multiple forming. And we're in the process of going through the insurance to get money to rehab the buildings.
So one of the things in the coming weeks that we're gonna have to, obviously we're gonna, have to make some pretty sizable repairs to the community center. But going back to the building assessments, there are some major things that need to happen in the community center if we're gonna keep that building up and running as is. So I just wanted to kind of, give you guys an idea as we go through the building assessments, which we'll have a future conversation about, some of the things that have happened, in the last week. The other thing that we had was, and Sal, if you could touch on this, the ceiling of the water reservoir was already compromised. We had, put shoring in the reservoir underneath the community center portion of the reservoir. And for those of you out there who, just to paint a bigger picture, the million-gallon water reservoir at the Jackson Boulevard pump station is located underground. A portion of it sits underneath the building portion of the community center that houses our clubhouse, our daycare. The remainder of the portion is underneath the playground area / parking lot, which is not visible from Jackson or Des Plaines. It's private entrance. It's where our kids from our summer clubhouse program and our school year childcare program, they would utilize that as their outside facility. There's a playground back there. And it's divided from our pump station by a fence. We have not been able to utilize that playground area for the last year because the top of the water reservoir has cracks in it. And you can see some of those cracks visibly on the asphalt that is present back there. You may remember we were looking to redo the playground back there. We had experts come in and determine that based on the cracks that were on the surface, it was not safe for us to have people, let alone children, running around there. So we have moved our childcare, our summer childcare program has been moved to the school district last summer and then this summer as well. So the cracks that are there, we have put in a monitoring system. And so we've been monitoring those cracks for the last 9 months approximately.
It's been about
a year.
Yeah.
And then it was also determined that the portion of the water reservoir that sits underneath the childcare center needed to have supports put under it. So we went ahead and we put shoring underneath. So if I had the opportunity to go down into the water reservoir when it was empty. If you go down there, you'll see basically it looks like scaffolding that is supporting the community center portion of it underneath. And with that shoring, the community center is deemed structurally safe and sound. We did not take the expense to put it on the playground portion of it because it would have been a considerable amount of money for something that we weren't sure what we were going to do with yet. And so instead of putting the shoring in, we've made it so that nobody can go out there, and then we've moved the childcare so that they do have an outdoor, to a facility where they have an outdoor space that they can utilize. And so we continue to monitor that. I know earlier this week, we had people down there taking measurements to see if there was any movement and just making sure that the water reservoir with all the additional water that had been pumped through it, was still in a condition that, we weren't going to be in high emergency mode here. So we continue to do that, but we do know that the lifespan of the water reservoir is coming to its end. The council has previously discussed whether or not we want to repair the reservoir or we want to move forward with building new. We came to a decision that we wanted to take a look at moving forward with building new. We're at a space now where we've had Burke come out. They've given us presentations on 2 locations. We looked at the CTA lots and we looked at the village-owned portion of the Altenheim. For those of you in the audience, the portion of the Altenheim property owned by the village that we're looking at is this section here in yellow at the bottom of the TV. Currently, this space right here, this green space, right, Sal, is where we've got dirt and stuff anyways.
Mhm.
So currently the village is using this little green area. You'll see mounds of dirt. Usually we'll put mulch there. It's kind of our overflow for some land debris that, when we need to put over there. And so this is one of the areas that we're looking at for the water reservoir. Given the situation that happened, one of the things that also happened was our pump station was flooded. And so there was 3 feet of water, maybe, would you say about 3 feet of water that had flooded the pump station. So much so that when our water operators went in to open the doors, they actually it took 2 of them to push the doors open because so much water had gotten in there. And then it flooded the streets. When they opened it, out went all of our, as we're doing the lead service line replacements, we're required to give every homeowner a Brita filter And so all of those are stored there. They came out, all our new testing, our water testing material, that we had just gotten in the last like 2 weeks was there. All came out onto the street, so all of that has to be replaced. Our computer system that alerts us, that keeps track of, you know, the chemicals that go into the water and all the pumping values and all of that, that was underwater to a certain portion. So we have to have an electrician and our computer system people come out to assess whether or not there was damage. That right now it's working properly, but we don't know what the long-term effects of it being underwater are going to be. In addition to the fact that we know that it's an aging facility. It's a, you know, another portion of it is towards the end of its lifespan here.
Required to have.
Oh, yes.
So building new isn't just because it's.
Correct. So the other
ages.
reason we're looking at new is because currently we have 2 water reservoirs in the village. We have a smaller reservoir at Hannah by the Park District, and then we have this 1 million gallon one here, you know, over on Jackson. We are technically 1 million gallons short in the village, as far as, you know, the water that we keep on hand. So one of the other reasons that we're looking at building new is because we need to build another 1 million gallons, and we can't necessarily just add to the reservoir as it is at Jackson. There would be a lot of challenges to add 1 million gallons to that, and so the better way to look at it is to, you know, build 2 1 million gallon reservoirs to get us up to where we need to be for the EPA. So
So that's a strict requirement. We absolutely have to have another 1 million gallons. Or we won't be allowed
So
to.
based on the US EPA, if there was to be a catastrophe,
Mhm.
you should have minimum 2 days of supply of water in your system. Roughly, we go through between 1.25 and 1.5 millions of gallons a day here in the village. And that's not including a kind of fire support in case there was ever a fire. So you should have minimum 3 millions of gallons in storage. So we have 2 water towers that hold 500,000 gallons of water.
Okay.
And we have a reservoir that holds 1 million, and another one that holds 3.5 million.
Okay.
So right now we have about 2.3 million gallons of water. We're under what we should have at minimum.
So can you, and I already know, you went over this with me, Sal, but I would like to hear it again because it's a complicated topic for me. So at the last meeting that you came to, your associate, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, a
Luke.
very tall gentleman.
Yes.
Luke. When I was asking about, I was saying, why would we even be allowed to consider sort of revamping, restoring what we're working with at the community center if it doesn't meet requirements? And he said something about tapping into water from other communities could make it a go. So I would like to hear, again, sorry, I know you went over this with me, what that meant and if that's something we can still consider.
Sure. So I guess what he was intimating was potentially having a connection with one of the water supply or water commissions, right? So we did engage water commission since they have a line that runs right past there. And it wasn't a option to have them as a connection, right? So if we were to have that connection, there would be additional supply that would appease IEPA, right? In case there was a event.
We would also still need to have a water storage at that facility. So we would still have to build something over there.
Okay.
It would just come from a different source.
Gotcha.
but they're not willing to do that anyways with us.
Okay,
Yes,
so
that's
that's-
it's a non-starter. Yeah, they're not
Okay.
taking on any more customers, so.
Okay.
So
Keep
Jim,
that up, too.
lost water is pretty well documented in Forest Park, right? I mean,
There are forms that are filled out
there's-
annually.
There's no way
about
of
water
getting
loss.
completely accurate estimates, but, you know, is that figure factored into the calculations of 3 days need? I mean, I'm just curious, what are the domino effects of just building 1 million gallons? I mean, a no from the.
I mean, right now,
Would we
right
have
now, we-
difficulty getting
so Steve's question is, if we were to build 1 million instead of 2, right, what's IEPA gonna do? I mean, right now, I would say they do the same thing they're doing right now, which is probably just tell you, well, you're deficient in this category, right? And they also probably note other deficiencies that happens in all communities, right? But it's something that they want you to strive for and work towards.
The other thing too is a security thing. Right now, when we cleaned the water, the reservoir, we took out 1 million gallon reservoir out of our system. We were only working with 350,000 gallons to feed our towers and our system at one time. If there was to be a fire, if it was the middle of the summertime and there was a high demand for water, we would be scraping for water. Same thing would happen here. If you were just to build 1 million gallons and you need to take it out for cleaning or something went wrong with that tower, you don't have a backup. Here, since you're gonna be going through the project, you might as well put that extra water in there to suffice what the US EPA wants. On top of it, if you need to take one of the reservoirs down, then you still have another 1 million gallons there to work with. That will help you out.
Well, this is why we did the design with two,
With
1
two.
million.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
opposed to one.
let's explore that a little bit. So for the last forever, but let's just go back 20 years. We have about 1,300 less residents in the Village Forest Park than we did 20 years ago. We've survived on 2,350,000 gallons currently, right? Something like that, based upon what we have with our water towers. Replacing it in kind has been okay, right? Replacing it, I mean, going with just taking the 1 million that we've lost at the, or losing capacity at the community center and putting a tank there. They're putting another tank that holds 1 million gallons. It would reduce the cost by not quite a third, because you still have to do piping and excavating and all the rest of that stuff, but substantially, that would be a substantial cost savings when you're talking about millions of dollars, right, to do the job. We still would be okay for the grant, we just would be deficient in a check mark. And if we still had the water that we currently have, that we've been meeting the needs of the residents for as many years as I've lived here and forever. And we've done such while we have far less, or at least 1,350 residents less over the last 20 years, which is a good number according to the census. If we don't have to rush into 2 million gallons of storage, if we had a spot to put 2 million gallons, but we just erected or built storage for 1 million gallons with the potential for another, maybe fiscally that would be a little more responsible, even though we're not really putting the Village of Forest Park in any kind of safety or security problem, so to speak, when it comes to enough water, because we've always had enough water, right?
We never had a catastrophe.
Well,
So
You see these gray hairs, Commissioner?
I'm saying, yeah,
Um,
so we still have to, so the question that we have to answer here is, we need to guide staff on where to put water reservoir.
Yeah.
Not how many to build or what to build. I mean, ultimately, yes, we have to decide, we're gonna have to authorize what to build. But the question is, we are currently seeking funding for what to build. And the request is going in for what to build. And we are gonna approve a grant for what to build. But the question on the table is where it's gonna go. And the question we have to answer is where it's gonna go. And we have a timeline for where it's gonna go. And yes, we have to be good stewards of the village's money. But without answering where it's gonna go, what we're gonna build is irrelevant. So I wanna make sure, because we can't get any money without answering that question. And if we don't have any money, we can't build anything. So I wanna make sure we can answer that question first. Historical discussions, how much water we need, really doesn't matter.
do they make million gallon water towers?
We do, we would be
Already
putting
they're
two
cost
up. So
standards.
the design of it, the design of the water reservoir, we can at a later date design, we can decide to, phase that. Perhaps that's how we pay for it, is that we, build 1 million gallon first, do all the piping to add the second, at a later date. But as Commissioner Mellon Rogovan has stated, right now, the situation that we're in is, we have an opportunity to work towards funding through the WRDA, the Water Resources Development Act. In order to do that, though, in order to even take any steps forward with that, we need to put ourselves in a position where we will be construction ready if that funding becomes available. And so we need to, one, like Commissioner Mellon Rogovin stated, determine where we want this reservoir to go, and then we can take the steps forward to start the design on that. And obviously, throughout that whole process, all of those steps would come back in front of the council. Engineering firm would make a proposal on what it would cost for them to do the design and the engineering. They would come forward with that. We would try to then, we're also going to be working on trying to secure funding to be able to pay for all of these parts of it, right? But like any project, there's the design, the engineering, and then there's the construction portion of it. And Burke has, kind of given us an idea approximately of what that would cost. But until we put forth a space for this, we can't move forward with funding. We actually just had to pass on the potential for putting a water main into that would help this project because we didn't have a space. We thought we could move forward with it. The staff who was helping with the grant, they came back and they said, it's too vague. You need to be more specific. So we ended up having to change gears so we could still apply for the funding, but we couldn't do it related to the water reservoir because we don't have a space identified by the council yet as to where we're going to do it. So nothing happens until, like Commissioner Mellon Rogovin stated, we, as a council, give us direction as to where we can go for this.
And
So
I want to be perfectly clear. I'm sorry about that. Nobody here is advocating for anything that we're all advocating for responsible approach, so I don't think anybody here is advocating for something that that's pie in the sky or whatever, but let's take these things in order, and we are looking at substantial funding, and the possibility for substantial funding, but we need to look at making decisions in order so that we need to put the cart and the horse in the right order. So
My question was though, so I agree with you 100%, and I don't think anybody's second guessing anyone's love for the village and being frugal and
That's
fiscal.
right.
But what I'm saying is, like, I think what you build makes a big difference. Because if, in terms of reservoirs and all this underground, above ground, we do have 2 water towers in town. And I was just thinking, I know there was a time where we discussed another or a third water tower. And a water tower is a smaller footprint. And if that would open up other geographical areas in town to go vertical with a water tower versus the 2 locations that were presented. That's all the question.
how would
is.
going vertical affect the pumping of the water out to the residents because where
If you
they're
go
at right now?
vertical with the tower, or it's called a standpipe if you nowadays. It would be the same system that we currently have right now. You still have to build a reservoir there because water has to get pumped into a reservoir, pumps have to kick it up. Right now, with those reservoirs, we're only gonna go up so many feet, where gravity is gonna be able to fill those without the fire reservoir needed to fill those.
Is that right?
you have the towers.
So the tower's gonna be up 150 feet, whatever
Right
it
on.
is, 200 feet up in the air.
Okay, all right, so the task at hand.
So I just want to say, I agree with what you said, Commissioner Mellon Rogovin, and I'm sorry if my questions of, asking about like, can we still preserve, where we are? Like, I just want to make sure, that I'm completely comfortable with the notion that we have to do the 2
Oh.
towers, and it's not about
That's
putting the
fine.
cart before the horse. I'm not even on the cart yet. So
No,
I'm
no.
just trying to get on the
These are,
cart,
this is
And
fine.
and so these are my questions, like this was said in the last meeting. I just want to make sure that that's completely no longer an option. And then I'm going to say, okay, now we move on to
Yeah,
the,
that's fine.
location if it can't
So-
be at the community center. And I'm
So
good
it-
with that.
So if, kind of just getting back to kind of what Commissioner Nero and Commissioner Maxim brought up, do the pump station requirements change if we do 1 million or 2 million?
You're still gonna need a pump
You
station.
should have a
Okay.
pump
Yeah.
station.
So there's that, that's
Yeah.
pretty much gonna be a flat cost.
Yeah.
And does phasing it out, is that feasible to phase out where we put 1 million gallons, up initially, if that's what fits into our budget, and then, in a future year, we can add 1 million? million
Yeah,
gallons.
it could be phased.
As long as we plan for the footprint of it.
Sure.
Yes.
Where's the
That's
water
the only way.
reservoir for the north and south tower?
The north reservoir is at Jackson, and the south one is at, it's by the
Hannah.
tennis courts in Hannah.
Just
Yep,
building
right
behind
across
the
from the
day camp
tennis
building.
courts. Right by the,
And
billboard.
they have to have light capacities?
No, they're not the same capacity. One's 350 at Hannah, and this one's 1 million.
The reservoir.
Yes.
Then given the available square footage, I actually did a little thought exercise this morning, and was over at the North Tower. And went over and did some field measurements over at Jackson Pumping Station. The lot is 14,000 square feet. The diameter of the North Tower, which is the narrower of the two, is about 760 square feet. There's 5,000 square feet on a irregularly shaped lot south of the pumping station. Why couldn't we go vertical there, put another reservoir underneath the playground? I mean, where's our priority here? A limited use playground, or getting the water system back up and running? I'm assuming that the vertical is with the reservoir is the lowest cost of construction. That's what I've read. Is that correct?
I mean, you still have to build a reservoir, and then you have to build an entire standpipe from scratch. I mean, I'm sure that's substantial to begin with. And now you're dealing with the contaminated soil. Are we gonna take on the money
The
to,
pumping station is contaminated soil.
well, the whole area there? But
Everything
if you're talking about the
along
south lot to build a standpipe and everything, and then you have to run piping to it.
So.
Well, I think that should be explored. So you're telling me that the existing reservoir is in contaminated soil?
Across the tracks.
I
if
think
that's what
what-
No,
you're
no, I'm
talking
not
But
talking
Steve's
about,
not
I'm talking
talking
about
about
right behind, right proper behind the Jackson pumping station, not the parking lot.
I mean, I don't know if it would fit there. If
You'd
it
need,
does,
you'd need 700 square feet to accommodate the base. You could exploit the playground for the reservoir.
so what are you gonna do with the reservoir?
Rebuild it.
You're gonna rebuild it as is where it's at right now?
Okay, I have a question.
You're gonna have to rebuild it somewhere, right?
So our engineers evaluated all of this and came up with what they thought were the best suggestions. To start this from scratch, we can talk about, the validity of that, but we have a crumbling reservoir that would need to be completely rebuilt. Somebody decided at some point to put a community center on top of it. So if we're going to dig all of that out, excavate it, rebuild it, the hole's already there, great, the piping is there, great, but we have to rebuild a community center or a reservoir, then we have to build a brand new community center, which we may need to do anyway, and that's worth the conversation, but that need would be immediate and not part of our long-term facility plan. And then on top of that, I would imagine, unfortunately, there is going to need to be remediation there because there are train lines that go through there that are further back. And you haven't done any of that engineering work at this time.
Correct.
So please share with us from your engineering standpoint, why you chose the sites you chose to recommend and why you don't think the Jackson site is the best option.
So the Altenheim site and the CTA site, ease of access, ease of construction, right? You have 360 degrees around where your reservoirs would be, whether they're above ground or below ground. You can get in, you can get out. It's not tight. Current site, you got a railroad on one side, you got a building on the other two sides, and you have a very narrow access drive between the pump station and the community center, right? So access to that current site is tough. So that's why we had put in site 1 and site 2. The existing site, if one of the goals of that current site was to change, could be something that we could work with, right? So at the beginning of one of our presentations, you can rehab that current underground vault. You can take the top off, right? Your walls and your floor would remain. You would be putting a Band-Aid on it. You could buy yourself 20, 25 years and then have to revisit and do something there. It might not be a full recount, but you'd have to revisit. right?
For which we could do a sinking fund over a quarter century.
Sure, so,
Right.
so
You're
that,
gonna
so
visit
so
existing
that is
walls
an
there.
option. The challenge with that is, if you do that, your site, the underground reservoir is offline. You have no water in there for the duration of whatever that construction period is, which would have to be at least 3 to 5 months if you're all lined up and you have everything ready to go, right? Another option with that current site, since we're kind of spitballing here, is if you were to build somewhere else, like you had said, Steve, either further west and south of the current site, which is really tight there, or maybe if you just built on the current parking lot for the community center, so along Des Plaines, you could build 1 million gallons there. And then you could replace the current 1 million gallons in the same location, which would be great because there's very little excavation. You're taking off all the concrete and just rebuilding it or building inside of it. Right, so that's an option, but then the building disappears at some point, and you can either rebuild it within that site on top of a reservoir, or that gets put somewhere else. So that would be the community center itself. And then you'd also want to rebuild the pump station, and we could find a spot for it. It's a smaller footprint. So we can work with that current site. We didn't dive into that into too much detail because site 1 and site 2, the Altenheim and the CTA were a little bit easier for access. And they gave us that ability to build it while leaving the current one in place and active. But if we were to decide that we were able to eliminate the community center building for at least some period of time, and you build a new reservoir under the current parking lot while the old one remains active, then you would have that coverage, right? Because that's what keeps Sale up at night, is not having the storage for any sort of period of time.
But the design, engineering, and construction fees would be the cheapest of all options, correct?
I don't know that we've explored that.
Yeah,
Well,
We've only explored
it's a
doing
shorter,
it.
it's a shorter distance, so
there would be less water main piping, right? Because right now we'd have to run from the current site all the way over to either the CTA or to the Altenheim. So the piping itself would be a lot simpler. It's basically nothing, right?
So getting back though to the 2 sites that were presented to the council. Staff is looking for direction from the council as to how to move forward with this. That's kind of where we left our last presentation with Turk. We presented the information. We came back and answered questions in regards to the different, the different sites, and then the different reservoirs that were available. And so staff is at a standstill at this moment. We can't move forward with any design. We can't move forward with any funding. And funding is it's gonna take some time, for sure, especially if we go the route of the WRDA, where we have to really legislate. We're gonna have to work with our legislators to get support for that. We need to join a authority that already exists. And so there's gonna be a lot of work that needs to happen with that. So, as far as the conversation goes today, ideally, I would love to leave here with some direction from the council as to what you would like to do.
So we're just abandoning any talk of, like, we were just having of possibly a third location, like.
I mean, so
I'm
that
just
is
curious, like, if
that is
we-
completely up to the council. And certainly it's up to your decision. That was something that staff looked at, and based on, the fact that we would have to put our current reservoir out of order. We came up with the 2 presentations that Burke made in the past to you based on those recommendations of staff sitting down with our engineers and talking about what would have to happen if we were to do that. And there's a long list of things that would come out of play. Now, if you guys come back and you tell me, hey, go take a deeper look, dive into it, then
It's
so be it, we will.
It's hard, because, there's staff here too, bringing up points that are interesting to me, and I don't know enough about, the infrastructure of water reservoirs to know if it's worth exploring. Like, I just don't have that knowledge.
I do recall, I recall some of this conversation. I don't remember everything. I apologize, but this has been a good refresher for me. But I think it's awesome for the folks who decided to come in and attend us today to know that there was some thought into this besides just two options, and that we really did get into the details. And I think what we landed on, if I remember correctly, is that you're gonna be out of service with 1 million gallons at the community center, which I think was a big point of contention for us when we decided on the other two. And I think the other one, if I remember correctly, is that we were thoughtful about the potential for future use of that piece of land. And I think with those two coming into consideration, we decided on the other two. And I think that's where we landed, and that's where we move forward from, if I remember correctly. But I still think it's important, now that I remember that, sorry. It's just, I think it's good for everyone to know that these decisions aren't made in a vacuum, and that all ideas and all feedback is good feedback, so.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to touch on too was when we were discussing all these plans, I want to do it, how many reservoirs, how much water to preserve for the village. We're always trying to be proactive for the residents and everyone for the village. Just like we do when we do our water main projects. I mean, you were a fire chief. Now, we currently have 4-inch water main that we replace, and we're always advocates to make sure that we replace them every single year. Preferred size piping for water for fire protection would be 8-inch. So we currently have 4-inch that we replace. We can easily go to 6-inch and save money. We always go to 8-inch because it's preferred and the proactive thing to do. Just like the water reservoirs, if we do have. the
I
potential-
prefer to drive a Land Rover, but I drive.
Of course. But if the land's there and the hole's dug, if there was money for it,
Yes, sir.
we would try to be proactive and put the 2 million. Of course, if the money's not there, we would pipe for hopefully potential 1
Sure.
million gallons.
Sure.
But that's what we were trying to do when we were planning. This was not only the location, but how to be proactive for everybody.
Yes, sir.
And if I could piggyback on just real quick what Commissioner Nero was saying, like, so much of this also points to why it's so important for us to be starting the sort of facility master plan. So that as stuff like this comes up, we already have sort of these thoughts in progress. So we are thinking about the long-term future uses of our property. And I think we can include the community center in this discussion just by looking at that. Like, what are the potential future uses of these different properties and how will this affect them? And one of the things that we can look at is, you know, where is that value? Do we really want, for instance, the community center to become all water reservoir when maybe it's beneficial to the village to be thinking about selling that property for, you know, more of a TOD type of development? Is that better? Do we really want to lose that completely? Because it's not smart to put a building on top of a water reservoir. So if we wanted to have something that's a little bit more multifunctional, does it make more sense at the Altenheim? Because maybe we can bury it there and that can have, you know, I think
We talked about recreational space. on top
recreational
of it.
space, you know, maybe that's where the Prairie Path is looking to extend. Maybe that becomes a trailhead for the Prairie Path. Like, that could be maybe better incorporated in the Altenheim space. You look at the CTA lot, we don't know what's happening with the trains. You know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, mergers and, you know, improving safety and reliability and all of that. And it's like, that parking lot could be used quite a bit in the future and still be producing a lot of revenue for the village, which used to be to the tune of $500,000, I think, a year. So do we want to lose parking too? So let's have these conversations now, because that's why we're here. But I feel like without getting too deeply into the engineering work that they have not done, I think we can still talk about that space and what its future use is.
Can I start with a, Jim, did you put this slide together?
I had put the slide together,
Okay.
yes.
So my question here, and this is the project cost summary, for anyone, I think Rachel's gonna bring it up. I asked Rachel if there was a breakdown. She said no, because we hadn't engaged you, to do like a detailed breakdown. But I'm wondering if you can give some sense to me of the differences, if we're looking at, let's say, above ground at Altenheim is 10 million and CTA 11 million. Is that 1 million extra at the CTA? Is that all soil remediation? Can you give me some kind of?
Yeah, so
basic
there
breakdown?
is actually a lot of numbers behind this that
Okay.
support it. We have a, 2-inch thick report about analyzing the different options for different types of material that can be used for water reservoirs and the different locations. This is just something that we thought was succinct, to present.
I don't need the 2 inches, but maybe
I'll expand on it a little bit. So just looking at those two sites, the main difference is the soil at the CTA is gonna cost more. So not that we need to dig out any more dirt, it's just the dirt that we dig out of there needs to be brought to a special landfill. So there is what they call dump or tipping fees that you have to pay above and beyond what you would normally pay. So that's where that extra $1 million comes up on the above ground version, right? And then as you go with the deeper version of a partial barrier or a full barrier, you're digging out more dirt, and that dirt is costing, incrementally more than, say, over at Dalton.
$1 million.
Soil borings over there?
We've done some soil borings at each location. We would have to do additional ones.
What product are we seeing?
It's one that I can't pronounce and that I always forget. It's not one of your typical ones, but it
It's
is,
not
it
lead,
is
it's
naturally
not-
occurring.
It's not any of the unholy, you just don't want to find.
Right.
We have an estimate of,
Blow up this slide.
Can
you make that slide?
Can you make it bigger?
Screen?
do we have an estimate of the,
And speak up,
remediate,
please.
an estimate of the remediation, as an offset for the, costs associated for transecting the parking lot, going west 300 or 400 feet?
Yeah, so that's built into those numbers, right? So the additional cost for the CTA is the dirt, but there's also a deduct for less pipe.
Right, right.
So that is reflective of it, right? So put in other words, the Altenheim is significantly cheaper to build on because of the dirt is clean,
Right.
but you do have to pay a little bit more for the pipe to get there.
I have a question about,
Is it a direct offset or no way? Obviously not.
No, it's not dry, yeah.
when we're looking at like sort of the above, the partial and the fully underground. And I asked Sal maybe to get these, I don't know who has these figures, but, what would sort of the yearly or whatever required annual or regular maintenance be like for those facilities? Like, I know above ground, there's a cost in painting it every few years. Like, just what are the average costs that the village would be incurring on a regular basis?
Do you want me to start with that? So what we had envisioned for the above ground would be a concrete reservoir, right? So you would not paint it. So if you wanted to, you could power wash it, which would be, minimal. If you wanted to, you could paint it, but then you have the reoccurring cost of painting,
But
right?
it's not required.
It's not
like the
required.
concrete.
Now, if you were to go to a steel, right, then you're painting it and you're maintaining it just like we did with the towers themselves. So that does become more costly.
Is the cost the same for steel versus concrete?
For construction, it is different costs. So those costs that we had shown there were all based on a concrete reservoir because that was the most economical. We have other data with numbers with steel. And then you can have your logo put on there. You can have other images. They can be painted different colors, but then you do have to maintain it.
Where's concrete? Or is it
It's
all
the-
precast
It's
construction?
precast and we fold it up and then there are different versions.
Surprise.
But if you're gonna do fully underground, then it's cast in place, right?
Okay. yeah.
So what Commissioner Nero was asking was what type of concrete, and that depends if it's above ground or if it's below ground. Two different types of concrete construction methods. Precast, where you build it and then you put it together like Legos versus everything's poured in place if it's underground. So the lifespan for both, above ground, partial and below ground is all about the same. I'll say 50 to 100, but 75 is kind of like the lifespan that you would expect given typical maintenance, right?
Do you think that the lifespan would be affected based on location? Like, would lifespan of the CTA versus the Altenheim be affected based on like external factors?
Only external factor that I can see between them would be the proximity to the rail line. And so either corrosive soils, which I don't think that we have any corrosive soils, but vibration, right? So I know that the rail line right now is it's either not active or it's active but never used. So if they were to change, maybe that adds a little bit of some deterioration or degradation to that site, but minimal. There's, I don't know if you want to kind of paraphrase some of these notes that we had, but, there's
Pricing?
annual inspections that you should do
Right.
on any of the size ones.
3 to 5 years, you should have someone dive in. It should be cleaned, inspected the inside of it.
Yeah, but that's all of them.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's, yes.
Yeah. there's no major differences in regular or required maintenance. for
Correct.
these. Okay.
When we're talking about the completely underground one, is it similar to what we have now where we could, but shouldn't put a building on top of it or could have a park on top of it, for example? Or does it have to be left, just open with nothing on it for maintenance, whatever? Could it be green space on top of a completely underground one?
So as long as it's designed with the intent of something being on top of it, it can accommodate that, right? So you would have a thicker slabs if you know you're gonna have a skate park, baseball field, walking path, whatever it happens to be. That is possible. You do need to maintain security for certain portions of it, right? Because there are access hatches and vents, overflow vents that need to be secure. But there is plenty of other neighboring communities that have, I know Elmwood Park's got a skate park on top of one of those, so there's ways to construct that, but you need to make sure that you have that plan before you build it.
Old Park has ball fields
Oh,
at
there you go,
Ridgeland
yes.
and Division.
I would say we choose something that you can dig up if you need to and not put a building on it.
No, I'm not recommending a building. I was just wondering, can we
Yeah.
we run around and play soccer there or whatever? Okay.
So, so I just wanted to mention, we've already heard that, we're pursuing an IEPA low interest loan for $10 million with a 20-year repayment. And the WRDA Water Resources Development Act, we're working on funding for a sizable amount, which would cover much of the cost of what we're seeing there. And so for both water reservoirs. So, it's important that we all ask the questions that we need to know as part of the presentation that we heard from Jim. But I think it's really great to know and ask the questions about funding, but to have a sense of where we'd like the water reservoir is important, because I know I would like to hear public comment and have time for that, and we're at 12:25.
Yeah, I agree.
so-
In the essence of time, I think we should
Yeah.
get right into it.
Yeah, so I personally would like to go on record at this meeting that I would like to see us choose. For myself, I feel good about choosing the Altenheim, and I would like to see the village pursue the underground option, or making sure that we for the fact that it would improve our quality of life for residents, to choose the Altenheim but to choose the underground option. And the fact that we've chosen a location in the Altenheim that minimizes the use of that location, and then we sink the structure as low as possible. There are renderings that show we have landscaping, and we will the landscaping will develop over time. But the design, will minimize the impact and the enjoyment of that space. There we go, right there.
And to note, because I was confused by this, you're indicating that as the underground, but he's just showing us where they are. They would be fully underground.
Yes, otherwise you won't be able to see it if I just put grass.
As opposed to this is a partially submerged.
That's partially
Um,
submerged.
This would be,
So.
you know,
I'm-
fully above ground.
Yeah.
Fully submerged.
So
It's not-
we're just, I'm just indicating a preference. This is not a decision meeting. We're just talking about what our preferences are. But I'm gonna, so we're providing guidance right now for staff to pursue. Again, this is part of a decision-making process. Guidance for staff is to pursue further information and feasibility for design. So we are not, there may be other things we find out, other things we need to pursue. But I'm going to go on record as saying that I would like to minimize, maximize enjoyment and minimize, and also, I want to make sure that we have fiscal responsibility. But I think this is a very good option for our residents, and I'm for our village.
I have one question. This is an outstanding thing that I never got answered. I had asked at a previous meeting, how much, even rough estimate, would locating the water reservoirs on the Altenheim affect sort of its desirability for developers? Or how much would it impact how much we could, if we wanted to sell, some of that 5 acres, how much impact would it have?
I'm confident that our appraiser's statement that it would not have a disparate impact on residual values. So it would not affect that. I do want to get on the table that, and I just verified it on my computer. Government utilities are a special use in the R1 district. So this would require a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission.
I would,
What about R2? And is that zone, what is that zone?
What zone was that, you said?
R1.
So no impact, you're saying, on development?
It will not affect the residual cost per square foot.
Thank you.
Do we have that for the community center property?
What for the community?
Like, if we're putting our long-term use caps on as we talk about all of this stuff, we don't know potentially what the community center property might become in the future. And
Yeah.
maybe we do decide that it is worth, I'm not saying we're doing this, but what if, we're thinking about that long-term, and, not sort of setting us up for issues like a water reservoir under a building. Would that development be affected by a water tower going there as well? I feel like that applies to all the sites.
I
we're
only
looking
asked
at.
about this because I knew we were getting the
Yeah.
appraisal on some portions of this, so I was trying to say.
Yeah.
could we
If
throw
we're
this
reaching
guess
consensus,
in on this?
absolutely. If you ever saw the fence, I was like, I'd love to know all of them if we're still.
I would too, absolutely.
Do we have other guidance for staff?
yeah, I do. Thanks, Michelle. And mine's different than yours. And I'm hoping I can sway you here, but it sounds like you've made up your mind, but it's a little different of opinion. But, that's what we do, right? We have discussions. I was really keen on the Altenheim location in the beginning because, well, it doesn't matter. I was, but I changed my mind. We have an underutilized parking lot at the CTA. And the CT, it's not something that's, I look at trends, right? If it was underutilized for the last 2 years, okay, well, maybe it's gonna come back. But it's substantially been underutilized for the last 10. And I think it's just been getting worse in terms of public transportation for folks parking there. When I first moved in the neighborhood, there was almost every spot was taken, but it's not the case now. That particular location has a railway and it faces the CTA. It's out of sight, out of mind-ish. You are, I'm a fan of above ground location over there from a cost standpoint. I'm not an engineer, but I have to believe that subgrade construction does present cost implications for maintenance and inspection just because of the nature of how the earth impacts concrete construction in terms of moisture and corrosivity and all this stuff over time. It's very easy to inspect a water reservoir that you could walk up to and look at from the outside. And if you wanted to, you could pump it down and walk inside it and look. And that seems to me like it would be a little bit easier for testing. Again, I'm not the engineer, but that's just something that jumped off the page. Here's some other things to consider. We have a very large parts. Can we go back to the Altenheim overlay, please? The zoomed in version. Yeah, that. So if you look at all of that, from my position and I think the village standpoint, we've had this piece of land for many, many years. And I think even parceling off 1.5 acres for a water reservoir may not sound like a whole lot. Depending on how creative we get with the use of that space, could have a substantial impact in terms of parking or structures or whatever you want to put there. Certainly, as from the construction community, of which I'm near and dear, if you were to look at several locations and say, which one would you want to pick to develop? Well, I would want to develop the Altenheim, and I would want as much space to do that as possible, whether that be whatever ideas, structures or whatever the rules or the guidance there was. It was mixed use, commercial, residential, etc. So I think the best bet for the Village Forest Park, certainly in my opinion, would be kind of just having the space at the CTA lot that we've talked about, which was in the other photograph, fairly out of sight, out of mind, barring any kind of future use of said community center, which we don't have funding for. Above ground, for sure. Maybe a nice art installation on the outside would be appropriate to pretty it up a little bit. To have enough location there to in kind replace the 1 million gallons that we're losing, build the structure, fill it with water, decommission the community center, and be equal, and allow village funding and revenue to balance out to allow us to pursue future grant funding to perhaps add the other reservoir at another time. Now, the reason I'm passionate about that is because I think an underutilized parking location or parking lot is a far better use than eating up marketable real estate for a developer to come into town for whatever ideas we come to Forest Park. And I know that's it's a departure from some of our early discussions, but there's some ideas I think that I've heard that I think really keeping as much of that Altenheim property available for village use and for future use for whatever's going to go there, it would put us in a much better position of strength for future use of that space. Going subgrade and it sounds like a good idea, but it's very cost prohibitive. We've heard that. And if you wanted to do full green space over the top of it, you're going to compound those costs a little bit that were on that original estimate of $13 million. And even if you only put one in the same idea with another one in the future, I think it's important for us to look at this from a future use standpoint of that particular property and a cost standpoint, and really think about looking at that CTA lot. There's nothing over there right now. From a surface encumbrance standpoint, I've heard a little bit about contaminated soil. Don't go underground. You're still going to have some contaminated soil because you still have to do some structure, foundational work, etc. But you're certainly not going to have thousands of cubic yards that would have to come out of there, whatever, hundreds of cubic yards that have to come out to go fully underground. And from a beautification standpoint, anybody that drives down Des Plaines Avenue knows that that's up on a hill. So your line of sight really isn't gonna, you know, first thing you see when you go down Des Plaines is gonna be these giant water towers. And there's also some, and I appreciate the renderings on the second time through as well. You can also do stuff with shrubbery and bushes and trees and stuff like that to change the look of that from a beautification standpoint. But I think the overarching premise, and just to hit the point 3 times, is I think it would be slightly irresponsible to select the Altenheim property for this particular project, just because the marketable value of that land and the amount of that land we have that would be marketable or sellable would decrease by 1.5 acres, right? And from a builder's standpoint, what you could put there would be diminished by 1.5 acres. And that's a significant piece of land, especially in a village, in the Village of Forest Park, where there is no big parcels of land over an acre. There is none that's buildable. So I hope, I don't feel like I did, but I hope that you've heard my argument. I hope that you'll see it that way. And I think ultimately it probably has less of an impact on the residents of the Grove and the Altenheim and those sleeping for an eternity at the cemetery there. We don't have to bother them as well.
So Ryan, I think it needs to be said that we had done land studies for the 3.7 acre parking lot. And it has self-imposed limitations, specifically access and egress, the same that has been demonstrated by residents of the Grove, most notably left in off of Des only, no right out. And Peak at Madison was never fully vetted by Focus Development. Focus took a look at that lot as well because it's proximate, right? It's an adjacent property. We even, as part of the Altenheim discussion, talked about cutting a road in, transecting the tracks connecting to Jackson, but the Jackson Q at Peak goes all the way around to Wilcox. You're essentially, it's landlocked. You've got a 15 feet grade change from Des Plaines to the parking lot there. It's not a valuable piece of property. It's not really a viable piece of property. Neither are particularly viable due to the heavy traffic that we're experiencing, and until we're the Jetsons, the folks are going to be hitting the roads.
Right. And so what Steve's referred to really is what I would anticipate as an argument against the CTA lot, putting it there because it'd be a marketable piece of land and you're pushing one to the other. And you heard it there, right? I mean, builders aren't going to come. First of all, if I was a builder and I had a site to pick, I'm not going to pick one that's going to cost me 3 times as much money to clear and grub contaminated soil, right? I'm not going to do that. Number one, but and I'm glad you brought that up. There is the flow of traffic concerns there, which one way and the traffic, it just becomes kind of a non-starter from a development standpoint, which we have proof of, right? We've had developers come in town and say, no, really not interested in that for those reasons. So in anticipation of an argument that would go that way, that's something to consider.
Commissioner Vogt.
Thanks. So yeah, that's a lot to sort of address, but a couple of things that I wanted to start off with are, first of all, we have to think about the long term. Besides the fact that, well, the CTA was working at its best, capacity pre-pandemic, and we don't know what's going to happen as they're talking about mergers and increasing security and safety and all of that.
Pandemic was 5 years ago.
It's my thanks. That was generating easily $500,000 a year, but what is important about that parking lot versus, just selling something as a development is ongoing revenue. So sure, if it comes back to full capacity, now we get to look at annual revenue versus just selling the property and somebody developing it. Right now, I know that multiple organizations have reached out to the village to look to lease it, like Curry is leasing it right now. People do want to lease that land to park cars. So it's not, necessarily sitting there languishing. We have an opportunity to be creating regular revenue and a regular revenue stream. So we have to think about the long term and not just what is happening right now in this little period of time. The other thing that I wanted to point out that is a big hill, and that's not just out of sight. Anybody driving off of the freeway and going up Des Plaines, and this is sort of like the gateway to Forest Park, if it is above ground, and it would need to be to save costs because of the costly remediation, there's two big water towers we're all gonna look at. And the one thing that we're forgetting is our Grove neighbors are on either side there. So the folks on the west can look at potentially buried water tower, which is a park, or folks on the east can look at water towers and they're, and that's their view looking east. Because burying it at the CTA is completely out of the question. Burying it at the Altenheim is within, if we're comparing those costs, it costs more at the CTA because of the remediation. If we're gonna spend that extra million, maybe we should bury it, create a park where people can actually be utilizing it, and our neighbors don't have to look at giant water towers every morning when they go have their coffee on their balcony. Another thing that, what did I want to say? And we also have to think about this not only as what is land worth to a developer, we have to think about the community and what the community needs and what the future uses are best suited for. Sure, we want, if we're looking to sell land at some point, we want it to be, enticing, but we're still looking at 6.5, I think, acres of land that are undeveloped. And I can't really think of who wouldn't want to be, building near a park or whatever it is that we do want to put onto that space. So we need to start looking a little bit broader and at the long term and not just at the immediate term. The CTA gives me a lot of hesitation. First of all, because of visibility, it is going to be above ground. Everyone's going to be looking at it. We're losing the opportunity to have parking, and super future long term, when we think about the facility master plan, is the community center going to become something else? Could the village decide that we want to use the CTA property as our new municipal complex where Village Hall is, and maybe this building gets to be repurposed and focused just on police and fire? These are the conversations that we need to be having, but to, just completely gloss over that and not think about, what these different locations could become for the village in the future, I think, we're gonna shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit.
Well, I think that parking revenue is, I just think that's a non-starter. I think it sounds good, but we haven't had parking revenue coming in through CTA lots for many, many, many years, pre-COVID. If you want to use that. And we're not talking about the whole lot. We're talking about like maybe less than a third of the lot, right? We're not eating up the whole entire lot. And long-term thinking, I think, is exactly my position. I think long-term thinking for the Altenheim property, which is the title of this meeting today, by the way, and which I know we're talking about the water reservoir, but long-term thinking about what could happen to that property becomes limited on the creative use for that, unless we're just going to say, you know what, it's going to be a condominium structure with some green space. And if that's the case, that's not long-term thinking. That's not creative thinking. That's easy thinking. That's popping the easy button saying, let's just get enough land in there so we can pop out some condos and put a little park and call it a day. And I'm suggesting to you that we could do better than that. I know we can do better than that. And in order to do better than that, we have to preserve as much space in that particular location as possible.
Commissioner, did you have comment?
So we have like 15 minutes for public.
Was there an end time set?
There wasn't an end time set.
15 minutes.
But I just want to make sure that all the elected officials have an opportunity to.
No, I just didn't know we had a time limit.
Oh, I
kinda
thought it was
thought
like
we were like-
I don't know.
Okay.
I think
Good.
we didn't set a time limit per se. I think we had thought that the idea would be
No, no.
you know, a 2-hour meeting
I could stay here all
approximately.
day and.
We're allowing staff to go home at 2, right?
We are.
Might need a 5-minute
I think we
break.
kind
So
of,
we have a-
Okay, we're gonna
I
go
just wanna
longer,
make
but-
sure we're focusing on, you know, getting guidance for staff for.
Well, would folks like to hear public comment before we?
Well,
get-
no, no,
I-
no,
no,
go
I-
ahead and make your,
Okay, go ahead. Just recommend it, because did you have recommendations?
Well, no, I mean, at this time, I do think that, if we can pursue, you know, an underground facility at the Altenheim, to me, that seems like, given the urgency of the situation and having to address the water needs of the village and the crumbling, community center, I do think that that is our best option. And, I do think that is our best option.
I think we need to,
Wait, can we hear from the other
Can
council
I,
member?
yeah,
Oh, well, I'm not gonna come out with a general recommendation. I think I have more of a question.
can you
So,
please stop talking in the audience? In the audience, can we stop? Go ahead.
so if we have, the IEPA loan, if we get it, right, is for $10 million, is that still what we're
those,
looking at?
those were recommendations that we would look at.
Okay, but probably not more than 10 million?
I think we
No,
had
we-
put in for
we had put in
15
for
was our
15.
request, but
Yeah.
it's a loan. And we would find out, June 1 year from now if we're eligible for that.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry, I think what I was asking about was the grant we were gonna get, and that's up to 50 million?
That's
Okay,
different.
That's
yeah.
different, so, and that's still on the table as something,
It is on the table, but we can't start it until we find a location because we
Let me-
can't do design.
okay,
Until then.
let me ask this question, if we do design, right, this might be a crazy question. And let's say, just hypothetically, we say, fine, Altenheim underground, right? But then we don't get it, can we adjust our plans at that time, you know? So that we don't have to pay the extra for the underground, you know, I mean, what I'm asking is.
Can we
you
go
know,
to, we would have, I mean, how much design goes into having to redesign it if we go from underground to above ground at a later date? Like, say we don't get the WRDA
Yeah,
sure.
funding.
we can't afford it, right? Like our villages, we're broke. So if we're talking about someone paying for it all for us, I'm like, yes, absolutely underground, let's do it. But if we don't get that grant and we have to pay for it ourselves, all of a sudden the underground doesn't look so good to me anymore.
Sure.
You know, cause I'm like, this is a $3, or, $4 extra million that we just don't have.
So I do want to say, Jim, before you answer, if a direction is given on this, we're gonna have to make some recommendations on the budget and future projects. So looking at this right now, we have a lot of water projects. We've got lead services we have to do. We're in a good position because we started the lead services project early. So we're ahead of the game on that. So moving forward, if we continue to, this year, we know we're not in a great financial position, right? Next year, if we continue to be in that, obviously we'll have to take it year by year, but we're going to have to prioritize some of these projects, that we have on the table. So I just want to have that out there that, we prioritizing this project by saying, hey, let's move forward with this gives me the ability to work with staff on prioritizing the other projects that we have in place. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm sorry.
So to answer the question, once a site is selected, right, a portion of our effort is getting the main to that, right? And then a portion is designing the pump house. And then a portion is the actual reservoir itself, whether it's above ground or below ground. So only a piece of our overall design cost is associated with the reservoir itself. So once we start doing that design and if you say it's underground and it switches to above ground, well, what we did for the underground piece is garbage, or unusable, right? So there'd be some rework there, but not the entire engineering fee, right? Because the main coming to and from that site would still be done. And so a portion of it would be, throwaway if you switch from underground to above ground or vice versa.
And I guess if money were no object, I guess the last point on this, money were no object and if we could go underground with a non-forgivable loan, that'd be wonderful. I would still suggest we go underground at the CTA. And then we could utilize the parking, right? You could repave over it. You're still gonna have fencing and security and cameras for certain portions where your head house is and access locations and things like that. But if money was no object, I was trying to be a little more frugal, because if we had to bear the cost and we didn't get the loan and it wasn't, we had to pay it back,
Yeah.
then we have to go above ground. But if you wanted to go underground, stick it at the CTA, put it in the ground and pave over it, and you got your parking, and we could still stage for the Forest Park, St. Patrick's Day Parade there. It'd be wonderful.
I'm not sure how we would structure a special hearing where the village was the petitioner for a special use and have the council vote on that. Overthinking that?
Probably.
It's a question I can get answered by legal.
Commissioner, do you want to finish your thought, or I know what my recommendation is. My recommendation is gonna be, to choose site one, to submerge it at the outline. I mentioned earlier that I drive by Ridgeland and Division quite often. I've seen how recreational space is maintained over water storage. I'm not comfortable digging up a perfectly good parking lot. I think that parking is a premium in this region. I think from a very long-term perspective, Forest Park is still part of Cook County and Chicagoland. In the event that there's ever some kind of future emergency, either in Forest Park or elsewhere, the current CTA parking lot could be an important staging area for security concerns, rescue concerns, and whatnot. We've had a very thoughtful discussion, but I do think the Altenheim site is preferable from my vantage point, and so I'm making my recommendation.
Any other comments from the council before we move into public comment?
Sort of. Yeah, it's hard for me. I'm gonna be honest. I'm really on the fence about this. My sort of gut says let's put it on the parking lot because we've been holding off on the Altenheim for a really long time and we haven't completely explored the possibilities there at all. We have never had a full discussion about what we want to do there. Do we want to develop? Do we want it to be green space? What do we not? I know, putting it underground allows us to preserve some as green space. I get that. It just feels for me a little bit, to use the same analogy, like putting the cart before the horse. We haven't talked about what we want to do there. And so we're making a decision to put something there when there are a lot of really creative ideas that might be precluded because all of a sudden we're saying, well, we have these water towers here, and there might have been someone with some great idea out there, and we haven't asked people to come in, from the outside developers or anybody to come in with RFPs or RFQs because we haven't gotten there yet. So that makes me scared and I think sad for what we're doing with this wonderful piece of land that we have as a village. We have a parking lot that we're not using. I think Commissioner Nero has some really great points that it hasn't been used in a really long time. But I also, there is the potential for revenue, but do we want to make a decision based on, well, maybe the train lanes will run again and maybe this will pick up again and maybe we can bring in $500,000 a year again. I don't know if we can or not. I feel like no one's given us any indication of whether that's a possibility. And I really hate making decisions based on maybes and especially decisions this big. So I know that is what we're here for. I know, and it sucks. Like it's unpleasant. Like I feel really uncomfortable right now because I don't like to have to make this decision when I really feel like I don't have the information I need, and not from anyone's fault, just because there are so many unknowns and it's hard.
And I will, the only thing I'll add to that is I appreciate the fact that we have been able to discuss this last couple of months. The last thing I want to see is that I come in front of you and say, we have an emergency, we don't have a water reservoir. And that, I was on vacation last week and that kept me up for 3 days. While I was supposed to be on vacation, knowing that the water reservoir, that we had issues with it. And that I didn't know what the structural integrity of it was. And God knows if it was keeping me up, it was keeping Sal up. You know, when we had to drain the reservoir, to have it looked at, every day we were like crossing our fingers that one of our high-rise condo buildings or one of our industrial, Walmart, Farmington, Ferrara, you know, that something didn't happen, that we were not going to be able to provide fire service to. So I appreciate that we are taking these conversations, you know, that we've taken the time, we've had Bert come out. I mean, we've been meeting about this for at least a year. I know the presentations to the council didn't come until the last couple of months. And so, you know, I just want to put that on record that, I don't want to come to the council with a emergency situation. So, you know, we have opportunities right now. We have a funding mechanism that has potential. I mean, I won't say that we're guaranteed anything, but we have been in contact with the Capitol. We've been in contact with Congressman Davis's office and his staff. I have their numbers. I've been on calls with them. There is a potential path forward with that, but I can't make a move on any of that. And you know, the funding recommendations or suggestions that were made in the presentation, those were just the ones that we know of right now. We will continue to, you know, chip away at any small pieces that we can to help with things. You know, it's the reality is we already passed on a potential $1 million because we don't have a site. And I don't want to continue having to pass up on those when we know this is something that we need. And then the village is on the hook for paying for it regardless, because God forbid, you know, a catastrophe happen. So I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that from, you know, a staff's perspective of where we're sitting.
And I want to add that it's zoned R3. So I don't know that there would be.
The parking.
The online.
Yeah, oh, no.
So you have direction, right? Great. All right, so I think we're ready for public comments.
Right, I'm gonna move the microphone and I'm gonna move the podium into the line of the
This way. Keep going.
it's gotta go with you. Commissioner Bowman.
Check.
No, let T first. She kept raising her hand, and I mean, come on. And my thing isn't a comment, it's a question. It's a real. Let her.
State your name and
Teresa Morosek. I live at 7757 Van Buren. All these numbers, all these charts, everything that's been said at these tables today, nobody ever mentions residents, the people that I think you're supposed to be trying to represent. Over the past 10 years, there have been many petitions. There have been groups that have formed that have asked to have a seat at the table with this discussion of what happens at the Altenheim. We have a group at the Grove that has asked to, you know, have some input. And this administration has just always ignored us. And, you know, if you put it into the CTA parking lot, that is area that is not, you know, there's no houses directly around it. It won't affect people like it will at the Grove. And I would like you to please just listen to people who live there and who vote for you to, you know, have a say in all this.
Okay. One question. Amber Ladera, 7820 Madison. in the Altenheim German home for 17 years. Question: has there been a change in the village to the Altenheim German home restrictive covenant since you, Mr. Mayor, have held office? Well, then, lot of the pie in the sky, and I have that document. If it hasn't been changed, I think all of you in power over what happens in the village should take another look.
My name is Gene Armstrong. I live at 7753 Van Buren. I am the president of the Grove Mid-Rise Condominium Association. I'm the president of the Grove Community Association. Neither of these associations has taken any position with respect to the underground water, the water storage problem. So my comments with respect to the water storage issue do not reflect any decision or discussion by either of those associations. I will say that the comments I'm going to make about water storage are consistent with the positions that have been taken by the Concerned Van Buren Citizens Committee, which is established by the Grove Mid-Rise Condominium Association. For starters, I want to commend the people who have been participating. The focus has been impressive, but expected. So thank you for your concerned and concentrated focus on these issues that are hard to resolve. With respect to the future use of the Altenheim property, you have had prior presentations by the Concerned Van Buren Citizens Committee, and I'm not going to reiterate all of those. I will say that we would hope that you would honor the purchase agreement, that all open space would be public open space, that all development be commercial, residential, not commercial, take interest in concerns for traffic and noise, and the peace and quiet of those who live in the Altenheim. These views are largely consistent with the decisions and recommendations that were made by the Altenheim Property Special Committee that you did appoint, that submitted a report to you. With respect to water storage, underground might make the most sense. It preserves for the surface for other uses, like a park, like a parking lot. Probably not a condominium building, but it does preserve the surface for alternative uses. I think there are, in the Tri-Village area, there are only two elevated water storage tanks. They're both Forest Park tanks. There are underground water facilities in Forest Park, in Oak Park, in River Forest, and there are alternative uses that occur on those underground water storage facilities. So I think underground makes the most sense. With respect to the use of the Altenheim property for an underground storage facility or the parking lot facility, both of them I think would be appropriate for an underground facility. The thing that's most difficult to try to ascertain is sort of the future shock. What will be the circumstances for our village in the coming 50 years? Will we still have a need for parking next to a CTA train? Will most of the people who want to get to the loop live in the loop? Because there's a substantial effort right now to convert downtown office buildings into residential uses. So these are things that are difficult to anticipate, but probably worth your time to give some thought to them. Also, we have Zoom meetings, and I suspect that Zoom meetings will become more ubiquitous. The screens will get bigger. and the participation by people will be more and more. Whether we'll even have offices in the future is something that somebody's thinking about, not me, I'm too old to think of that. Now, I want to make one more point, and you might put up the renderings with respect to the above ground storage facilities at the Altenheim site. Yes, on the Altenheim site. Anyway, while you're looking for those, I think most of the people in the room are probably here because they saw those pictures. Those pictures are astounding and frightening to the people who live in the Grove. And I don't think they need to be, but if you look at that picture, you can visualize anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. If you look closely at those, you can see the Grove condominium building behind the trees, and the image of the towers, the tanks, looks like they're as big as the apartment building, and they look like nuclear silos. Now, I would respectfully suggest that just because the potential water towers are big circular concrete silos, doesn't mean that's what they would have to look like. And I suspect if they were architecturally pleasing, half the people in this room wouldn't be here. They are not architecturally pleasing in these renderings. So while I think the sense of what I sense is that most of the people on the table are moving toward preferring underground, and I certainly prefer underground, that doesn't mean that if it's going to be above ground, it has to be ugly. So if it's a concrete structure, it doesn't have to be an ugly concrete structure. The other factor that I haven't heard anybody really talk about, but I think is worthy of your consideration, is will creation of above ground water storage at the Altenheim impact not only the value of the Altenheim property, but also the assessed values of the properties that comprise the Grove community, because those properties have a significant assessed value. And if we put water storage like is depicted in the drawing, it would decrease the assessed valuation of those condominiums significantly, which would impact the tax burden, the tax revenues that would come to the village. So that's a factor that I think is worth taking into consideration. I'm glad the bike path is no longer a topic of great, just because you can spend somebody else's money doesn't mean it's a good idea. Thank you.
I'm Marilyn Janswitz, and I live at 7753 Van Buren. Okay. I was one of the first people to ever move in. Nothing else was there. Hertha was there. Raise your hand, Hertha. Oh, yeah, she was there. There was just a few of us there. So I've been there 20 years. And I have served for more than 15 years on the Concerned Van Buren Citizens Committee. I also served on the Altenheim Committee from the Grove. Okay, so I've really been tracking with this whole thing. Can you put up the site that has all the different colors on it? Is it up there now? I want to show something that I have as a big concern. And I've shared this with Steve a couple times, and he touched on it today. It's a pretty dangerous. So, public works and how to, place. Go in and out of here. And so this is a really kind of. So if in fact. the way- Water reservoirs, by the way, I like that. Okay, if they're on the ground, and there can be some green space. Because every committee I've been on has suggested from residents that green space be provided, okay, for the village, for people that are using the transportation, for the residents at the road, okay? So anyway, this it alleviates some of the issues on this curve. That where you go in and out south, and all your stuff, it doesn't have to be right there. Could be part of what the sign. Okay, all right.
But how you access it will be.
Yeah, how do you access it? Okay.
The whole area.
All right, that'll eliminate some stuff, okay? Now. Two more things. So if that's gone, that'll help with some of the danger on the. Okay. So that's this way. The other issue. In my opinion, okay? If this is where above ground water towers are. Forget it, there's gonna be a site problem coming. You know what I mean, you know how much goes in and out this corner? And then you have above ground. You really are gonna have safety. Or, so that's gotta be underground. Okay, so, anyway, plus the fact that Van Buren itself is a mess. I mean, it's very heavily used. So it has lots of potholes. I mean, for St. Patrick's Day parades, they come and put a little bit of, so it's not so bad. But then the rest of the year, it's, so anyway, if Van Buren could just be part of what you're planning, and you could consider not to have that big around the curves. It's so unsafe. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. Oh, by the way, this is very complex. And I can see why it's been kicked, the can has been kicked down the road for a long time. I appreciate all the work you're putting in here. Every one of you, I thank you. Yes, thank you.
My name is Alan Flynn. I live at 528 Grove Lane. Flynn, Flynn. I am actually the third president of the Grove Association. There's 3 associations in the Grove. I'm president of the Townhome Association. We have 53 units on the east side. And I just want to, first of all, thank all of you on the board that have done all this work to get to this point. And I only would like to ask that you continue to make good, firm decisions in the near term. Develop Altenheim, make a good plan. Put the water tower or the water containment units in a good spot. Now, when it comes to the Grove condominiums, they look west. When it comes to the townhomes, we are bounded on the east side of the development. Pardon me. The townhomes are on the east side of the development. So when it comes to the parking lot where the CTA is, That's our eyesore to really look at from our side. Yes, the mid-rise townhomes that have 5 floors do look out, but they are set back from there. So there's pluses and minuses to where you can put these water containment units. All I ask is that you start making decisions so that you don't have to run, but you can walk through this and make good financial condition or decisions, as well as make good decisions for not just the Grove Association, but the Village of Forest Park and all its residents. And that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
My name is Richard White. I live at 7753 Van Buren, part of the Grove Mid-Rise Condo Association. One of the things that we were talking about possible things that might happen in the future. One of the things that I think we certainly aren't going to know if this is going to happen, but one thing that may happen is if that railroad track gets abandoned, you'll own 2 pieces of land on either side of it and potentially have something that could be developed in the future. And second of all, I do personally, after listening to what was discussed today, prefer the Altaheim in-ground, underground facility. And I think but I certainly understand the issues around the whole thing. And I commend the board for its work on considering this stuff. Thank you for your hard work on this.
I'm Susan Beach and I live at 7753 Van Buren as well. I just have a question that the site plan shows where, this is Altenheim, shows where we would like to put the water storage tanks. There's the big pink and then there's the yellow. What is that other? Does that not belong to the village? That other square? Say it again.
Oh, in the west left corner, that's the cemetery.
That is, okay, thank you. That's all. I just was confused. Thank you.
Thank you. And the chair will entertain motion. Yes, sir, you're on it. Moved by Merrill, second. Second by Mr. Matt.
Commissioner Mercer? Aye. Commissioner? Aye. Justice?
Aye. All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry.